I have put February 24th on the presentation. I initially put today, but this started on February 24th. And that's a picture of some of the first missile strikes in Kyiv. And I awoke to this horrific news of this invasion, and it just brought so many things forward. I had assisted with the Unitarians when we brought the Syrian families in. Our family went around and drove around and picked up all the furniture and stuff. I learned a lot from that, and that was my launching pad for this work. I retired from my job in 2021, so heck, I had some time to pick something up. So go to the next slide, please. Okay. Why did our family get involved? This is kind of, unfortunately, this quote has been attributed to Edmund Burke, but it actually wasn't him that said it. We don't really know who said it. Kind of my motto. I had it on my office wall for a long time. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And there's a saying that I say, it's either you're part of the solution or part of the problem. So there is no gray ground when it comes to evil and wrong. My great uncle went into Europe after the Second World War, and I remember his stories. Probably didn't pay attention enough of what he saw in Germany when they set up, and when the Allies set up, trying to help the German people get their lives back. And he said it was barbaric. He told me horror stories of what the Russians did when they entered Germany. And I know we were at war with Germany at the time, but looking back on it, a lot of it reflects to what I'm seeing now and what we've seen in Ukraine. There's also a really good movie out called Mr. Jones, and it's a really good, we watched it recently, and I mean, how much did I cry? It's a reporter that he snuck into Ukraine before the Second World War, and it talked about what Stalin was doing to Ukraine then. So, of course, I started paying attention to the news, and I mean, seeing children and pets and elderly sheltering in a subway. I remember the video of the little girl playing the violin in the subway to keep people, calm. And it was so compelling. So I went to my very supportive husband. I said, I don't care what you say, we're going to do something. Of course, he didn't say a word. Next, Ben. And I went to my son too, because he's always my partner in crime. I enrolled in a Canada Host site because I thought this is what we're going to do. I thought, my son is home. Let's see if we can get a young man in, and Ben can show him the ropes of school. And so we applied, and I said we would take a family into host. I guess we looked very appealing because very quickly we had 2 families applying to our house. I didn't know what to do because I'm like, I have no idea. Like, what do I do with the second family? So I literally got in my car and I drove over to the Ukrainian church, and I met someone who has become a huge part of our lives. I call him Father Baudon. He is the priest at the St. George is Ukrainian. It's a Catholic church. The Ukrainian Catholic and the Roman Catholic are slightly different, as we've learned. Father Baudon was married before. He has kids. He is from Ukraine, and he left Ukraine when he was a child to move to Poland for political reasons. And he came to Canada, struggled, became a priest. And that's where it began, because I said, I was panicking. I've got 2 families. I don't know what we're going to do. And he put this big stack of paper in front of me, and he says, I got all these. Can you help me? So I sat down, and we started making phone calls and lists and trying to figure out how are we going to deal with all of these people. Like, my house isn't that big. Okay, next slide. So with John and Ben, and then with Father Baudon, and we partnered with Dr. Taylor, who I knew through my job that I had just retired from. The 3 of us sort of became the A-team of going out and trying to find hosts and ways to get the family here, doing basic fundraising. And ironically, the 2 families that applied to us never ended up coming to us, and which was a good thing, because I ended up working like 12, 14-hour days on a good day, trying to get all of this organized. Then we met up with Rachel Phillips from Trinity Church and Carla Rankin, who is from Petrolia. And the 5 of us, of our 5 groups, have really come together. I know Temple out on London Line Pastor Tim, he has brought in a lot of families. Altogether, we have about 200 people we've brought in. I couldn't even list them all if I had to. I've gotten to know so many people. So we started, that's my favorite photo, that's my Facebook photo. I'm a big cat person, and I'll have to tell you, whenever a family applied with pets, give it to Lisa. She will get them in, because as soon as they're kids and pets, I will move mountains to get them in. There was a really big thing that we noticed was the people that applied were young, and they had means to get out. So the disabled, the elderly, the poor, they didn't make it out. Now we did bring in one young woman who's an artist who is challenged, but in general, they couldn't get to the border. Unless you had a way to get to the border and get out, you sheltered in your basement. And if you were poor, you sheltered with what little food. The food these people ate, like there was one region that was occupied, they lived on watermelon because that grew quickly and that provided a massive amount of food. They canned it, they dried it, like they did everything they could. They lived on watermelon and apples. And I can't even imagine what that's like. Hey, Ben. So what did our group do? So Ben helped me. At one point, Ben came to me and he says, Mom, I've lost weight. I'm like, why have you lost weight? And he says, because you drag me out of bed, I don't get breakfast, we don't stop for lunch, and then you come home and feed me this crappy dinner. I'm melting away. So I dragged him everywhere, didn't you? So we found the first thing is to find people to take these families. So we went out and some people applied. Not everybody was accepted. It was a very discerning process. We would have to go and check out the homes and see if the homes were acceptable. And we met a lot of really cool people that are now, we consider them friends. Then we put out a call to Ukraine. We had on different websites, we have a form to fill out if they wanted to come to Sarnia, and we vetted those. I know it should initially, and this is where Father Badan really helped, because I'm like, get everybody out. He says, no, you can't bring them here if they're not going to be successful, because then we're just setting them up for failure. We can't bring them here if they're not going to be able to survive without their husband, like the mother and child. And so it became a process. It was really emotional deciding who got to come. And that is something like I live with some of the emotions of not helping everyone and not getting every cat out. Like that was really hard. It's the reality of it. Because we brought some families in and at my deep request, and it's been a struggle. It's been a big struggle for them. So the one thing that I want to be clear about is we had a lot of hateful comments coming at whenever we bring a male in, because the rule on the street is if they're under 60, they can't leave. Well, they can under certain circumstances. It is getting tougher today, but back then, if there was multiple kids, so any families over 2 or 3 kids, the father had to come to help the mom. If the mom had medical issues, the dad was allowed to come. If the father was disabled from fighting previously, which we had, the father was allowed to come. If the father was disabled, he was allowed to come. So there was certain circumstances, or if they were a student at the beginning, or if they were like a man of the cloth. So that also stood in the Second World War. If you were a student or a person of the cloth, you were exempt from service. There are a lot of military people that are people of the cloth. They're very passionate. These people are, excuse the language, pretty badass people. Like they get out and they fight. Like grandmothers were making Molotov cocktails. It was insane, like watching this stuff happen. So we had a lot of we would get negative comments. I really fought for this one young man that has become pretty close friends with Ben. And I'll get Ben to read it. He couldn't be here, he's sick. He was really disappointed, but he was gonna come and tell his story. I fought to get him here like tooth and nail. And when we posted his story, there was a lot of backlash. Well, how come he can come? He's a healthy 18-year-old. Well, he was what they call an exceptional person. He was gifted, he was on a scholarship, and he was a student. He was going to be a lawyer in Ukraine. He was exempt. And his mom and dad, he's their only child, the dad wasn't able to come because he's under 60, and they did everything to get their kid out. We found him and he was in Romania, and I saw his picture on a site, and I don't know what, I was just drawn to this young man's story, and his best friend happened to be in Sarnia. I mean, what are the odds? This girl that has been friends with him since they were 11 years old was already here with a host. So that was it. Like he was coming in. So it was months of getting his visa done and then trying to set up. We got him, because I don't take no. I went to Lambton College and we got him into Lambton College, tuition free. He's a pretty amazing young man. He was in Eastern Ukraine in 2014 when they annexed Crimea, and he told me a story of fleeing his schoolhouse with his friends, and the Russians were shooting at him. They were kids. Like he told me, his first words when he got here, and he's with Missy Burgess. I'm not sure if everybody knows Missy. She's kind of a well-known singer in Sarnia. He went into his bedroom and he turned to me and he said, "I've never had a room of my own." Like when people see our houses, they think they're mansions. Like I don't think my house is that big, but it's a mansion. So, it's a difference in, I guess, what's expected of a lifestyle. And he told me that he had never had a childhood because from the time he was 11, that's when he stopped being a child. So they fled Eastern Ukraine, they went to Kiev, and he fled again. And now he's here. His mom and dad are still in Ukraine until his dad can leave. They're not coming, but he's determined to get his parents here and become a Canadian citizen. So Ben, do you want to read what Nick sent you? While you look it up. So we assist with their visa applications, flights. We match them with hosts. We provide emotional support. So Ben's just going to read you what Nick was going to say.
For me, the war started in 2014 when Russia occupied my city. So now is the third time when I start my life from zero. It's not easy, but with such generous and kind people like Lisa, Missy, Father Bradon, Ben, John, and the whole volunteer group, I surely can handle it. My journey from Ukraine to Canada was one of my most difficult months of my life, but great things never come from comfort zone and with zero effort. I believe that eventually it will be worth it. Please keep praying and supporting Ukraine and its citizens because we need you every day. Canadians are our brothers and sisters, one of the most loyal countries. We will never forget your support.
So his name is Nikita, but he prefers Nick because he wants to be Canadian. I said, I don't know, Nikita's a pretty cool name. So once the families arrive, this is where Ben really helped. We helped them with school. We helped setting them up with medical. Dr. Taylor was very generous, and she's taken anyone who's Ukrainian. Dental, that's been a challenge, getting dental work. Like their dental system is a little behind ours in what they address. So there's like 24 years old people having teeth extracted or root canals because they're just not, it's not as a priority as Canadians are neurotic about dental care, not so much in Ukraine. Furniture, they need furniture, bedding, clothing, that was a big thing. We had so much clothing donated, we had to get a storage unit. And John can attest to hauling bags of clothing. And it's crazy what people donate, like evening gowns and like 30-year-old bras. It's like we had to weed through what was good and what wasn't. Bikes, I approached, there's Pedals for Purpose, which is a group founded by some officers that take bikes that have been found and not claimed. They rehabilitate the bikes. And so we drove all over Lambton County delivering bikes, didn't we, Ben? I have no idea how many bikes, like 50, 100, something like that. Rides to and from places, paperwork, getting OHIP, SINs, the YMCA has a great program, Goodwill Job Assist, and getting jobs. There's a big one. I mean, I'm still helping some of them get jobs. There's the language issue, there's the cultural difference, and Ben's going to talk a bit about the cultural difference. The biggest part of our job is being emotionally, physically, and spiritually supportive. We've been attending the Ukraine church here and there. I don't understand much of it. I'm learning some Ukraine by listening to it, but we've been going to Father Badon's church, which is in Ukrainian. It's beautiful, but we don't understand a lot of it. John speaks a little bit of Czech, so I know. Dobra, that's it. Dobra is good. That's all I know. I learned the first word I learned was cat, which is heat. That's male cat. They have a different word for female cat. Okay, go to the next slide. So this is our challenges. Human beings are complicated and messy. This was a big challenge and a big thing for me to learn. I'm kind of an idealist, very compassionate person, but I realized we're dealing with a host family and a Ukraine family, and sometimes they just don't jive. And you can vet people until you know like their baby shoe size. You can't vet emotions. So that was something we had to learn. Assisting people arriving with pets, this was a really complicated thing. Pets are not easy to just, there's only so many seats on the plane. Last week, I was dealing with bringing in a family of 7, and I spent days trying to get them on a plane. There's 5 kids, 2 adults, and 2 cats. The logistics of that were a nightmare, and the mom would not split up. So I said, I can get half you on one flight and half you on the other, and then you'll meet at the airport. You're only an hour between flights. No, she had to come, and I understand that. They fled Ukraine, and they were living in the Romanian government gave them a lot of Ukrainians apartments for really cheap. She's been supporting herself and her family by making baked goods and selling them at the market. Very resourceful mom. But they're here. They came to Montreal last night, just as we were picking up Ben at the train station. I got a text from her, we're in Montreal, and then they're going to take a train here. I couldn't get them to Toronto for under $14,000, so they flew to Montreal. Flights have been insane. The airlines, it's cheaper for me to fly to Paris for the weekend than to get someone here that should be a refugee. They're not considered refugees, by the way. They're considered guests or visitor, which they should be refugees, but because the war hasn't been declared as a war, if there's something, I don't know, Canada didn't recognize them as refugees, so they weren't assigned the same benefits that some of the Syrian families had. Children from different parents. This was complicated. If you have a dad that's fighting on the front from one of your kids, and you have another dad with these kids, we had to get people to go to the front and have them sign off on the paperwork, and that was complicated. Complicated flights. Oh my gosh, with Nick we brought here, we didn't realize, but he was booked on a flight that was supposed to land in Washington. And if you're landing in the States, you need an American visa. Even though you never leave the terminal, you need an American visa. It's the only country that would do that. So we had to fly them. He went to Warsaw from Romania to get on the plane, and he was denied access to the plane. He had to go back to Romania, which is not a short journey. And then we had to get him on another plane the next day. We went down to Toronto to pick him up, only to learn he didn't get on the plane. So we came home and went back, 2 days later? Hosts and visitor conflicts. This has been a big one. I feel like Judge Judy. It's sorting out all of these things. Emotional trauma. You don't think that it's sometimes the hosts that have had trauma. We had one host that was bringing a family in because of loss in her own life, and when she brought the family there, she realized the loss was impacting her. The Ukrainians obviously have trauma, and although they're very strong people, you don't realize how big the trauma is until they get here. PTSD, depression, anxiety, emotional trauma for both of them. I'm going to skip to the next one because I'm going to let Ben talk about the cultural differences. Money, we get calls every week about expenses because even though the hosts were prepared in May, costs have gone through the roof. Grocery costs when you have an extra 4 people in your house. We have so many hosts saying, I don't know what I'm going to do. Like, how can I feed these people? That has been a big thing. Gas prices for us this summer. I'm a volunteer and we're driving all over, and we were spending $250 to $300 a week in gas. That comes out of my pocket. So I can't imagine the hosts like having to drive these families around and feed them, and the cost of heating their house just went up. Their mortgage might have gone up. Expenses has been a huge stressor. So I'm gonna let Ben talk about some of the cultural difference. He did a little coaching of us on cultural differences.
One of the biggest cultural differences to keep in mind that we've encountered a lot is indirect versus direct negative feedback. In Canada, we are mainly used to indirect negative feedback. If you tell somebody about their presentation, you don't tell them it's absolutely terrible. Now, in Ukraine, and it tends to be a trend with Eastern European countries, they stick to direct negative feedback, which is more so getting rid of the extra frills, niceties of feedback and getting right to the point. which can lead to many people confusing that for dislike and discontent with many of the hosts. However, they're just being who they are. They're playing with their culture. It's not really anything against them. And that's the way to show respect. When a Ukrainian person tells you directly something about what you do, it shows that they respect you and that they trust that they can share that with you. Another big difference that we've also encountered a lot is the tensions with Russia. And this has kind of been left unsaid by many Ukrainian groups and Ukrainian relief groups. However, many people that we have brought in on Eastern Ukraine specifically had Russian heritage, which led to a lot of difficulties. Bringing them to Canada was like the equivalent of bringing a German or Japanese person in Canada during World War II. They weren't necessarily respected, even though many of them were with Ukrainian families and didn't live in Russia for many, many years. And that led to many challenges with getting their passport, driver's license, etc., when it was much easier with Ukrainian citizens, which is also another reason why Nikita changed his name from Nikita to Nick, since Nikita is a Russian name and Nikita. Yeah, a Russian name, and he didn't want to be referred to as Russian even in his own Ukrainian community.
So we've actually brought in, it's funny how, and I was gonna talk about that story, that girl that you were talking to, and she's Ukrainian, and Ben said, well, not all Russians are bad. And we have brought in some Russians, like, that are married to Ukrainians, and this one gentleman hasn't been back to Russia in years. He is Ukrainian. He felt himself Ukrainian. When we brought him here, we went to get his driver's license changed because the Canadian government, or the Ontario drivers, anyway, they were taking Ukrainian driver's license and trading them for a G2, which is basically a driver's license except for you can't drink any alcohol. So it was no big deal. He went in being Russian, and his driver's license was in Russian because he said, I didn't want to change it because he worked all over Europe, and he said, it wasn't a big deal. His driver's license was confiscated, and he said, well, you'll have to start back at the beginning. You'll have to get a beginner's. So actually I launched an investigation with Bob Bailey's office because I'm like, this is crap. Like, this guy's been married to Ukrainian. He's lived in Ukraine for 22 years, 23 years. He's Ukrainian, but no, they took his driver's license. And then we found out that other Russians had their license changed to a G2. It was just, in my opinion, a prejudicial decision made on the moment, and this guy has not been able to work because he can't drive. And I find that prejudice, even though I know Russia has invaded, not all Russians are horrible people. Like, we can't demonize an entire culture based on the actions of one person or one top of the hierarchy. There's a lot of amazing Russians. Like, we have one young guy, he worked for, he helped with the logistics of planes. He didn't want to have any part of this war. He had just married a Ukrainian woman. He said, I'm not doing this. And they came here. He's one of my favorite humans. He was Russian by birth. He looks actually more Scottish than Russian, but so next slide, last one. So how can anyone help? We're always looking for volunteers because I'm getting tired. Driving around, booking appointments, partner with a family. We do have a buddy program that I started in August, September. It was supposed to take all my work away, didn't. But we have volunteers that step up. So if I need somebody to drive, I just type in my buddy WhatsApp group and somebody volunteers and they drive them to an appointment. Some families need extra help with food and groceries, especially with the rising grocery costs. There's families that just can't afford it. And some people have had to go to the food bank. Gas cards for volunteers and families because driving around is expensive. Although I saw gas prices did come down a bit. Donations are always welcome. We take donations through the St. George's and through Trinity. I use St. George's because it gives you a tax receipt. And so anyone that's interested, Father Badon actually went back to Ukraine right now because there was or Poland, he's in Poland, there was a death of a bishop or something, and he's there helping with the service. He should be on the plane back to Toronto. And I think that's it. Anybody have any questions? Thoughts? No? We close to the time?
When they talk about when the war is over and Ukraine has won, are they going back, or do they see the future?
So that's a really good question. I find that it's divided on almost a fire, youth, that a lot of the young people, they see the opportunities here. There is a big cultural difference, as we've learned. People like our age in Ukraine, they're not considered young, which I feel pretty young still, and they like their ways. And there's gender differences that we probably should have touched on. So women back there don't do men's work. Like, it's a very divisive society. So women that come here and see the opportunities to do a job and not have the division of gender kind of want to stay. So it's 60%, and 60 want to stay and 40 want to go back. And it depends on age mostly. And also their hierarchy in Ukraine. Like, some people came and they were like very high, and they'll never attain that here. Like, they'll never attain the hierarchy in their job here. But the difference in gender roles was something that we've really noticed. I was lugging some boxes, and I'm like, I'm kind of a sturdy farm girl kind of person, and I'm hauling stuff, and the guy's like, every Ukrainian that's seen me, no, you don't do, men do. I'm like, what? Like, I couldn't understand it, but the thing about Ukraine is how long it's going to take to rebuild it. How much money, like, we're talking like Bakhmut is destroyed. Like, there's one of my friends, one of our families that came here, the wife went back for some reason, and she drove through Bakhmut and was showing me video as she's driving through and telling me the neighborhoods. Like, there's gorgeous buildings, half the building's gone. I mean, billions of dollars to repair it. And the fields, like getting the mines out of the fields where they have to farm. Like, there's, can't remember how many devices they said they found. It was a lot of like explosive devices.
Sorry.